Hello family, Curt Bragg here, coming to you with this week's Reflect, where we're reflecting on the Sunday sermon. And this Sunday we had a guest speaker, Yasser, and we're going to be reflecting on what he had for us this Sunday. So, wonderful message. We had a sweet time of worship, and during that time he had made several comments about the presence of the Lord during our worship. And as it got into his message, there's some questions. As you may know, we come to you with this Reflect and try to bring up some parts of the message that may be a little deeper portions where we glean some more information about the message. And so this week's message talked a little bit about a message we've heard in the past about identity and how it's important to know our identity as individuals and our identity as a church. And going into detail about that and recognizing that sometimes people are trying to steal that identity, and sometimes the devil will come to us and use people to try to steal our identity or try to steal our giftings and get us over into where our giftings are non-effective. And so that's was kind of the overview of the message. So some questions I would have would be, who are you? Who am I? And are we trying to be somebody else? A lot of times when a pastor or minister speak, and it was mentioned even Sunday about how David danced and came in a time of worship just unapologetic in front of the Lord, and basically stripped off all his garments and danced freely, and how this was a type of worship that David did, and we need to be like David. And then a lot of times we hear about other people of the Bible that have done, whether it be Noah or whether it's Moses. Like a couple weeks ago, we heard about Moses and how he, come to the Lord and he stuttered and who am I, Lord, that you can use to speak to your people? And we know the story that the Lord used him, and we talked last week about Abraham. So these individual people of the Bible, they had an identity in the Lord, and we have an identity in the Lord, but guess what? Our identity is not them. Now, there are certain pieces and parts that these people attributes on how they seek God that we need to model ourselves after, on how they worship God that we need to model ourselves after, in the passion, maybe not in the same way. And that's what I want to hit on, is that if we're truly being honest with ourselves and we're truly who God made us to be, we're going to be different than those people. We're going to be different. I'm going to be different than Pastor Josue. I mean, you can tell I'm different than Pastor Josue. The type of message that Pastor Josue may bring would be different than the message that you may bring, and you may be a gifted minister. You may be called or gifted to do different things. So knowing our identity, there's peace and rest in that. There's always a challenge in that, because God is always going to challenge us even beyond what we think our natural identity is. Moses is a great example of that, to where he was challenged beyond who he thought he was. He thought he was, always going to be this guy that stuttered and had this speech impediment and that would never be able to speak to people. But God used him anyway. And so we need to not lessen our identity because of our natural abilities. That's always going to be the case. But also with that, are you David? Are you Moses? Are you Noah? No, but I can be the best at whoever I am, whoever God's created me to be. You can be the best at whoever God's created you to be. And there's always going to be people try to steal that, and that's one of the highlighted points this week was that, people are going to recognize your fruit, and they're going to come and try to barter with you to exchange your fruit for something else. And so the giftings and passions and the things that you possess, the abilities that God's given you, and the fruit that comes out of what God's done in you, people are going to try to take that. Not just use it, because the fruit should be usable, but they're going to try to supplement that and change that. And so one of the things that was mentioned, and it's really interesting that if you look back, really if you just look at nature, God always uses, nature will always point to a biblical principle. If you're looking at true nature, biblical principles and biblical styles that are used throughout. And, no matter what it is, whether it be a growing season, and that's why the parables are so important, because they're always a reference, or most of the time they're a reference to some sort of natural thing that we can identify with that is also used in the spiritual realm, whether it be reaping and sowing like we talked about last week, or in this case, kings and where there's certain people that are trying to rule over us and trying to get us to submit to them, or asking us to rule over them and supplement or trade our giftings and our the things that God has given us for a throne that may not be the direction we need to go. And so, and thinking about that in the natural, I want to get back on that. There was a time when, back in school, when I was president of a club that we had at school. And the one thing that I noticed in president of a club, and it's a little bit of association with King. We had Robert's Rule of Orders and different things like that. So I'm kind of trying to paint that parable because it's something I recognize. So I was president of a certain club, and that particular club, those people knew that I knew the Robert's Rule of Orders, and they wanted me to continue to try to get these certain things that they wanted approved or passed that was important to them. But as a president, you can't do those type of things. As a president of this particular individual school event, the president can't do anything besides preside. And so a lot of times in kingdoms, you can set up rules and you can set up orders, and you see that throughout the Bible. And we see that even in the natural, whether it be governors or senators or president, whatever. And they can go and present a case of the people. But a lot of times they're limited on what they can do unless the people write the bill or unless the people present a certain thing. Yes, certain governors and senators can write bills, but there's certain things that they cannot do unless the people permit it. And so my point with this is that sometimes your hands get tied because of the authority that you've been given, and you have to reign and rule in a certain sense. If somebody's come to you and wanted to steal your fruit and you to be to run a certain thing over them, your abilities to produce that fruit could be hindered because of that authority that you have to then take on. And so that's a little bit of a natural parable between the things that was mentioned on Sunday. But the key is about knowing our identity and that we're ambassadors for God. So no matter what our identity is, no matter what our fruit is, no matter how, we need to continue to be growing in God. We need to be continually doing the very best we can in what God is asking us to do, but it's never going to be somebody else. So there's rest in that, and there should be peace in the fact that you don't have to be somebody else. You don't have to have the giftings and talents of somebody else, but you need to be the best that you can be. And so there's the challenge, and there's the rest. And that was talked about also, is that, the devil never sleeps, and we have to have rest in order to perform our daily. If we went without any rest, we would be jello. We would be nothing. And but God fights on our behalf while we're resting. And sometimes there's, they say, Satan never rests. He creeps at us, but we know in God that we can have rest. And that type of rest is a peace and a knowing that God is fighting for us. And so if we're diligent and obedient sons and daughters of God, and we know who we are and we know whose we are, then we can rest in that, and we can fight, and we can be fruitful. We can do the things. We can be soul winners, and the Bible talks much about being bearing much fruit. And so, no matter what we do, we need to bear much fruit. But don't let somebody try to put you in a box that you're somebody else, or that you need to be like somebody else. Paul said, follow after me as I follow after Christ. But he didn't say be like me. He said follow after me. So, there's certain types of things and actions that we can model to follow after Christ, but we're not necessarily that person. So hopefully this helps, and please submit any of your questions to Reflect, and we'll do our best to tackle this again next Sunday. Thank you.